All right, we just have a quick question here from Asanka saying that he's having some trouble finding some of the charts that we use in TradingView. And he just wanted to know whether we can give him some of the codes that we use because he's been having a little bit of trouble finding them. So what I've done for us, Asanka, is I've basically created just a quick Excel sheet of the of all the codes that we use, of all the chart layouts that we use. And how you can find it is you can just go to the terminal, just open up the terminal, go to the currency research section, and then scroll down all the way to the last section there, which is called the analysis resources section. And then you can open up TradingView Codes. And if you open up that Excel sheet, it should look like this one. And we can just quickly run through this. Each one of these sections are one of the layouts that we use. So some of them you'll recognize. On the left-hand side, you have the description, and on the right-hand side, you have the actual code. Now, just quickly running through them, the first one there, the major FX pairs. In this one, we just have the 7 major FX pairs alongside the dollar index, DXY, in there for additional analysis. Then, of course, we have the equity futures layout. Now, we prefer using the equity futures because they run throughout the day, giving us a good sense of the overall equity risk tones by looking at the futures. And we've got the major ones there for the US, the S&P 500 futures, the Dow, the NASDAQ. On the Euro side, we have the DAX, the Euro stocks, the FTSE. On Asia, we have ASX, and then, of course, we always have the VIX in there as well. Then also looking over to bonds, or bond yields, rather. If I just open up that chart, should look familiar. Now, this one, you can have anyone that you want, really, whether it's the bond or the yields. Whether you want to have the bonds itself or the yields doesn't really matter, as long as you know how the bond and the yield is expected to move in certain market situations and conditions. And you can choose which one you want to look at. And if you want to have the bond instead of the yield, if you go back to that chart, you can basically just remove the very last Y from every one of these codes. So if you want to look at the bond instead of the yield, instead of typing US 10Y, you can just type in US 10, and that'll give you the US 10-year bond instead of the actual yield itself. Turning to commodities, very simple there. Looking at gold, copper, and WTI and Brent crude. You can add other metals in there like silver and platinum if you want, but I find these 4 is good enough. Next one there is the risk-sensitive FX pairs. Now, also very simple there. In this one, we've basically have all the 3 high beta currencies, the Aussie, the Kiwi, and the CAD, and we've paired that against the safe havens like the Japanese yen and the Swiss franc. So by looking at this, you basically, if you have a strong risk on or a risk off tone, you want to see all 6 of these moving up in risk on and all 6 of these moving down in risk off. And if that is not a case, of course, you can do some additional research to find out why that is the case. Maybe the markets aren't, risk tones aren't spilling through into the FX space, etc. Good one to always have on the charts as well. Apart from that, you have the Fang Plus stocks. Now, these are the big tech names out there like Apple, Amazon, Tesla, Intel, Google, Microsoft, etc. And this is basically just seeing what is happening in the big tech names. And the reason for that is the importance that they have in the big equity indexes like the S&P and the NASDAQ. Because these indices are market cap weighted, these big tech names make up the biggest part of the indexes. So any huge moves in them will affect those indexes, and that can, of course, affect the overall equity flow. So also very handy to have on the chart. Also looking at that pre-market open numbers always gives us a sense of how the markets will be trading them. Then the next one there is we have EM currency pairs. Now, this is where we look at all the emerging market currencies versus the US dollar. This is very handy because it shows us whether we're trying to see if we have a broad-based dollar move, is that move only limited to the developed market currencies, or is it also something spilling over into the EM space, or is there something happening in the EM space and that is spilling through to the rest of the market? So good example of that would be today. We have the US dollar Chinese yuan just tanking to the downside, and that is actually seen as a positive risk input, and we've seen some additional upside in the US equities. We've seen upside in the Aussie dollar, as one would expect from that. So always a handy one to have on the chart. Next one there is a volatility tracker. So very simple here. We're just trying to track the volatility of cross asset movement. So that'll be tracking the volatility of the S&P with the VIX, or tracking volatility of oil with OVX, or tracking the volatility of gold with GVZ, etc. Very handy to have on the chart, especially where we see massive spikes to the up or to the downside will affect the underlying instrument for that particular volatility index. And then we also have the major macro charts, very simple one here. We've just basically grouped all the major macro market charts together. So that'll be the euro dollar, the dollar index, the VIX, the S&P, US 10-year bond, gold, etc. Just giving you a quick overview of what the markets are doing all in one screen. And then the next one there is the stock sectors. Now this will be individual stock sectors like industrials, materials, energy, technology, financials, healthcare, etc. And it's helpful to look at, especially in the same way that we use the Fang Stocks to see what type of big drivers is moving something like the Nasdaq or the S&P. We can also break that down into individual sectors itself, seeing that whether we see a strong move to the up or to the downside, whether that is driven by a particular sector in the market or not. Also useful in the same way as we said, like we use the Fang Plus stocks as well. So that's just a quick breakdown of all of these different charts that you use. As we said, you can find it in the terminal there in the research section right at the bottom, called TradingView Codes. And the way you use it is when you are in TradingView, you just copy, literally just copy this code that you have into TradingView, and it should give you the corresponding instrument that we're looking at on the charts on a daily basis.